In addition to the influence of classic Vedic and subsequent Asian religions, we also find a direct link to Sri Ramakrishna's teachings as brought to the West by Swami Vivekananda. To understand how that influence manifests itself in our culture, I'll quote from Sri Ramakrishna in his Divine Play, Swami Chaitananda's newer translation of Sri Sri Ramakrishna Lila Prasanga. The more we study the life of Sri Ramakrishna, the more we shall see that he does not belong to any particular country, nation, sect, or religion. The master who is established in Bhavamukha will enter people's minds as liberal ideas, breaking all narrow barriers, putting people in his new mold and binding them together with a unique cord of unity. It's not necessarily that everyone will have a picture of Ramakrishna on their shrine, or even that have a shrine, or even that people will have heard of Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, or Vedanta. It's that the liberal religious ideas that Sri Ramakrishna demonstrated in his life and as disciples taught will permeate our societal consciousness and be accepted and practiced by many. Although, as Swami Satprakashananda said when asked, will Vedanta take root in the West, he replied, yes, but the source may not be recognized. In classic Indian philosophy, there are two classes of religious writing. Shruti, which includes the Vedas and parts of the Upanishads, which are considered direct from God, and Smriti, those religious stories written by man, which refer to, demonstrate, and reveal the God-given truths as principles in practice. Swami Prabhupada wrote in The Spiritual Heritage of India, the Vedas are often abstract and difficult, and to be comprehended by the multitude, they require simplification, expansion, and illustration, in a word, popularization. Thus, it was alongside of the Vedas there gradually came into being a large body of writings, sometimes half secular in nature, sometimes almost wholly religious, which are appropriately known as auxiliary scriptures. Auxiliary scriptures illustrate that, just like in Hollywood movies, the Vedic doctrine, indeed the doctrine of all religions, is that right prevails. In it, virtue and truth, though sorely tried, triumph at last over vice and wickedness. Films such as Star Wars, which embed religious truths, serve the same function today, to popularize religious and philosophical truths in a digestible, sometimes sugar-coated, sometimes blood-soaked format. Of course, Ramakrishna Vedanta is not the only source of the Eastern influence in the West, but Thakur, Swami Vivekananda, and the monks of the order have been an inspiration to countless highly influential scientists, authors, artists, and musicians who've expressed Ramakrishna's liberal religious ideas in their lives and works. Examples of those who have had a direct Ramakrishna Vedanta influence range from Nikola Tesla, Joseph Campbell, Aldous Huxley, Christopher Isherwood, Houston Smith, J.D. Salinger, Philip Glass, the Beatles, and today's subject, Star Wars. Evidence of that broad influence can be seen in the proliferation of yoga studios, the embrace of meditation by mainstream medicine, belief in karma and reincarnation. While not the sole influence, the Ramakrishna Vedanta movement is an early and persisting influence. The preparation of the ground for that influence in the U.S., including religious tolerance, has been around since the founding of the country. It was also the founding principle and purpose of the 1893 Parliament of Religions, which Swami Vivekananda famously attended to begin his work in the West. Here's an example of a spiritual message in a Hollywood production based on one of the most spiritually influential books of the 1940s, Somerset Maugham's The Razor's Edge, which was made into a movie starring Tyrone Power. In the book, Maugham introduces the reader to Advaita Vedanta and reveals how, through deep meditation, as guided by a guru, Larry, the hero, goes on to realize God. The inspiration for the book and subsequent movie was the result of Maugham's 1938 visit to Ramana Maharshi in India. Maugham's statement about the book that they invented nothing became a source of annoyance for Christopher Isherwood, as the press and many fans believed that Chris was the model for Larry. Chris wrote in a letter to Time magazine that was printed in the December 17, 1945 issue, quote, "I am not, as you have twice stated in your columns, the original or part original of Larry in Mom's The Razor's Edge. I can stand a good deal of kidding from my friends, but this rumor has poisoned my life for the past 6 months, and I wish it would die as quickly as possible." Swami P. N. Isherwood did help Mom translate a verse from the Katha Upanishad for the novel's title and epigraph. "Rise, wake up, seek the wise, and realize. The path is difficult to cross like the sharpened edge of the razor. So say the wise." Although the plot of the book and film is considered by many to be spiritually superficial, and the on-screen performances may seem hokey now, it succeeded in bringing many Americans to Eastern religion in general, and specifically to Ramakrishna Vedanta.
What has brought you here, my son?
I've come to learn. Ever since the war, I've been searching for something that I've not been able to put into words. I've been told that from you I might find guidance.
God is the only guide.
It should be mentioned that both Swami Pravananda and Christopher Isherwood advised Mom on the writing of the novel and also had input on the resulting film, most comically in giving acting advice to Tyrone Power for the, spoiler alert, the Enlightenment scene. John Yale, later Swami Vidyatmananda, wrote in his autobiography, Tyrone Power came to the Ivar house so that Power could discuss with Pravananda the characterization of Larry. Swami naturally found it difficult to visualize Tyrone Power being able to portray a realized soul. Standing with his back to the fireplace talking to Swami, Power commenced to discuss his conception of how he planned to convey Mom's hero. Prabhavananda responded in unconcealed disbelief. "And you think you can play Larry?" Power sat down with a thump at this candid questioning of his ability to depict a man of illumination. But the two talked the matter over, and as a result, Power studied the role and its religious implications with care in an attempt to give as authentic a portrayal as he was capable of giving. After watching this next clip, I wondered if Swami told him not to blink.
I felt that I'd been released from my body, that I was suspended in midair. All the things that had been confused before suddenly became clear to me. I had a sense of knowledge more than human. I felt that I'd broken away and was free. I felt that if it lasted another minute, I'd die. And yet I was willing to die if I could just hold on to it, because for that one moment, I had the feeling that
You and God, we're one.
yes.
Swami Vidyatmananda, who helped establish the bookshop in Vedanta Press here in Hollywood, wrote, in 1951, a series of articles was inaugurated in Vedanta in the West entitled, What Vedanta Means to Me. Looking back through this mass of personal testimony, I was surprised how many of the writers had volunteered the information that their interest in Vedanta had first been aroused through reading The Razor's Edge. In exploring Star Wars as a vehicle for spiritually laced content, we can't neglect the long-standing contribution of science fiction, which has always lent itself to creative thinking. This was particularly important for expressing controversial ideas on the mass media of television, blunting the controversy by using extraterrestrial beings in settings. Star Trek, which first ran on American TV in 1966, had a pretty good description of Maya in this episode, Spectre of the Gun. Chief Science Officer Spock, the Gyani of the bunch, realized and explains to the crew that they are confronted with an illusionary threat, and that the only way to survive it is by knowing beyond a doubt, grokking, if you will, that what they are experiencing is not reality.
Existence cannot be without them. What do you mean, Spock? I mean, Doctor, that we are faced with a staggering contradiction. Physical reality is consistent with universal laws. Where the laws do not operate, there is no reality. All of this is unreal. We judge reality by the response of our senses. Once we are convinced of the reality of a given situation, we abide by its rules. A
more recent example of Vedantic influence is shown in this next clip which is a variation of a story that Sri Ramakrishna liked to tell about a lion who is raised by sheep and has forgotten his own true nature.
Look down there. You see, he lives in you.
Forgotten who you are, and so forgotten me. Look inside yourself, Simba. You are that what you have become. You must take your place in the circle of life.
How can I go back? I'm not who I used to be.
Remember who you are. You are my son, and the one true king.
That was from Disney's The Lion King, which also has direct connections to Joseph Campbell's work and Vedanta, as I'll show later. Compared to other films that deal directly with religion, Star Wars is a bit of thin soup, philosophically speaking. But if you want to see films made specifically as sincere religious statements, which are outstanding examples of a rich, hearty philosophical stew, I recommend these movies. The Third Miracle and Household Saints both examine the nature of saintliness from the Catholic perspective. B Season looks at spirituality from the standpoint of Jewish mysticism. Peter Sellers' Being There is in the European tradition of the Holy Fool. The Truman Show examines the nature of Maya and our relationship with a personal God and Creator. Groundhog Day is a modern parable about karmic bondage and the way to salvation. Terrence Malick's ambitious Tree of Life alternates between cosmic scenes of the creation of the universe and a story of the tragic effects on a family after losing a child. The film starts with a quote from the book of Job. "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted with joy?" Millions of people of all faiths found Field of Dreams to have mystical qualities with themes concerning Dharma and the drive to seek liberation. So much so that the farm in Iowa where the film was shot has become a place of pilgrimage. The science fiction film Zardos, which came out a year before Star Wars, has a direct Vedanta connection. The Oscar-nominated writer-director John Borman cites his inspiration for the film being ideas raised by Aldous Huxley's novel After Many a Summer Dies the Swan, which Borman had read as a young man. Huxley, of course, was an initiated disciple of Swami Prabhavananda. Also, Borman and Christopher Isherwood were friends at the time the movie was made. But Star Wars has an enormous advantage over all these films. It happens to be exactly what the public has a huge appetite for. Thin soup or not, the public eats it up and orders more. Kids love it and generations bond behind them. And in between the sword fights, chases, and things blowing up, there are some very real nuggets of truth presented in a way that even a child can recognize and understand them. The film's creator, George Lucas, has done something remarkable. He's embedded real religious philosophy, grounded in Vedanta-like universality, in a body of wildly popular films seen by hundreds of millions, and people truly are moved by them. The impact of Star Wars franchise can hardly be overstated, as it's the most popular film series in history. When Star Wars was first released in 1977, it broke all box office records, and as did the recently released sequel, The Force Awakens. There have now been 7 episodes of the continuous plot of Star Wars and many more planned by Disney Studios. I hope to demonstrate how George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, was critically influenced by author and mythologist Joseph Campbell, and then show how Campbell's personal beliefs and professional work were strongly influenced by Vedanta, including his deep and lasting association with Swami Nikhilananda, a disciple of Holy Mother of the Ramakrishna Vivekananda Center in New York City. I'll explore what that magic ingredient is, which can transform a Hollywood action-packed science fiction film into a worldwide, multi-generational, cross-cultural phenomenon. But first, some background about the lives and career of Joseph Campbell and George Lucas. Campbell was born in 1904 in White Plains, New York. From his early childhood, he was fascinated by the legends and myths of the local Native Americans. Campbell came to realize that the myths were not just entertaining stories, but communicated wisdom, experience, and truths to pass on to each new generation. In 1924, after his sophomore year in college, Campbell met a young Jiddu Krishnamurti on board an ocean liner. Their friendship lasted for years. Campbell called the meeting serendipitous, which he defined as an unusually significant coincidence that turned out to have a major impact on his life. Carl Jung, another influence on Campbell, would have called it synchronicity. On the same trip, Campbell was given a copy of Edwin Arnold's The Light of Asia, subtitled The Great Renunciation, the story of Prince Siddhartha becoming the Buddha. Campbell noted in his diary, "The fish was hooked." As part of his post-graduation work, Campbell was determined to survey all the world's legends and myths, and to that end, he learned several languages, including Sanskrit. Eventually, he came to recognize a pattern, a universal theme that ran through the myth stories of all societies and ages. He borrowed the term monomyth from James Joyce to describe the repeating themes and symbols of the mythological journey of the hero. In 1934, Campbell was offered a teaching position at Sarah Lawrence College, where he would remain until his retirement in 1972. In 1939, one of Campbell's students told him that his Schopenhauer lectures sounded a familiar note and gave him a book translated by Swami Nikhilananda. Campbell wrote in his journal, "The important thing for me this year was not the war in Europe, but the discovery of the Mandukya Upanishad." Soon Campbell became closely associated with the Eastside New York Vedanta Center, occasionally lecturing there and even acting as the society's president for a time. He was also instrumental in helping the Swami to edit and translate several books, including the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, published in 1942. Campbell gave his very first public lecture of his career at the Vedanta Center in 1941, titled Sri Ramakrishna's Message to the West. The lecture was published in the November 1941 issue of Prabhupada Bharata. Campbell's lecture was full of direct quotes from Sri Ramakrishna, like this one. "Mahabhava is God consciousness. My joy after the experience of Mahabhava was equal to the pain I suffered before it. Mahabhava shakes the body and the mind to their foundation. It's like a huge elephant's entrance into a little hut. The hut is shaken to its foundation. The fire, the pain of this experience is not an ordinary feeling." Campbell's subsequent work will expand on these themes and become the words he lived by. From the influence of Ramakrishna came Campbell's trademark advice to embrace the fire in the mind that drives us to action and to seek our true dharma, and thus experience the bliss of a life lived heroically. Near the conclusion of the article, Campbell says, "In Dakshineswar, only a few miles outside the Victorian metropolis of Calcutta, practicing his sadhana not according to the enlightened modern methods, but the most ardent, most superstitious, most idolatrous traditions of timeless India, now hanging from a tree like a monkey, now posturing and dressed as a girl, now weeping before an image, now sitting night and day like a stump, himself terrified at what was happening to him, swimming in the ocean of mother's love. Stunned by the experience of Brahman, Sri Ramakrishna cut the hinges of the heavens and released the fountains of bliss. This bliss, this joy of absolute man, is the power that now goes out against the empires of the historical ego." Campbell was well known for the advice, "Follow your bliss." In fact, the saying may be more famous than Campbell himself. Recently, thumbing through an in-flight magazine, there it was, "Follow your bliss," being used to pitch the idea that people should travel more, because apparently your bliss is elsewhere, but fortunately can be reached by plane. Looking online, you can find the quote everywhere. We can say with certainty that it's not a call to hedonism. Rather, Campbell challenges us to do the serious work of attaining our highest personal potential and experiencing the spiritual bliss that comes from doing one's dharma. This is a direct reference to the spiritual experiences of Sri Ramakrishna. During his later years, when some students thought "follow your bliss" to be encouraging self-indulgence, Campbell is reported to have grumbled, "I should have said, follow your blisters." In 1949, Campbell's monumentally influential book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, is published and quickly becomes the recognized authoritative textbook on the world's mythologies. One suspects that the TV's wildly popular Game of Thrones, in their representation of the Temple of the Many-Faced Gods, has borrowed more than the graphics from Campbell's book. Campbell explains the purpose of the book is to help uncover some of the truths disguised for us under the figures of religion and mythology by bringing together examples from around the world to help us understand the truths of life. On a slightly different note, Campbell's friend and colleague Huston Smith did the same kind of detailed research, documentation, and harmonization of the world's great religions under the guidance of Swami Satprakashananda, a disciple of Swami Brahmananda Maharaj. After a decade of research, Smith's work was published in 1959 as the highly influential textbook, The Religions of Man, now titled The World's Religion. Both Campbell and Smith encountered Swamis of the Ramakrishna order in the formative stages of their academic careers. Huston credits his decade-long work with Swami Satprakashananda as the launching pad for his career. Campbell held that the mythologies of the world give us metaphors for understanding higher realms. Huston Smith calls these myths, parables, and legends the technical language of the transcendental. Huston points out that mathematics is the technical language of science, which allows us to understand and even make predictions about realms which our logical minds cannot fathom. For instance, the quantum level of physical reality presents absurdities when described by everyday language and understanding, like the wave-particle paradox and the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. But these realms do make sense and are resolved when described by mathematics. The stories in mythology and scripture are not to be taken literally, but are the technical language that helps us make sense of the transcendental realm, where everyday language fails us. Campbell reminds us that the virgin birth has nothing to do with biology, and the promised land has nothing to do with real estate. Campbell says that the Eastern teachers are telling us that the important thing is not what happened thousands of years ago when the Buddha was born or when Jesus was crucified. What's important is what's happening in you now. In 1954, Campbell traveled to India with Swami Nikhilananda. His diary notes from that trip are contained in the book titled Bakshish and Brahman, which was only published years after Campbell's death. Campbell found India challenging and he became critical of Nikhilananda. Campbell felt ill-treated and used by the Swami, who he felt was overly negative about America while excusing India's foibles. Also, Campbell's inclination was towards Jnana Yoga, and he was disappointed by what he felt was the order's emphasis on bhakti, feeling that true Vedanta had little to do with ritual worship and gurus. Campbell was also put off by the contradiction that although Swami Nikhilananda spoke of all religions being equal, he seemed to hold Vedanta as being superior because it recognized the fact of universality. Ironically, Campbell himself seemed to have held similar contradictions, and they felt the Jnani path was superior to bhakti. Although the relationship suffered strain at this point, it didn't break. I wrote to Phil Cousineau, who's an author, filmmaker, and host of the TV series Global Spirit, pictured here with his mentor, Joseph Campbell. Phil worked extensively with Campbell for years. He confirmed the significant influence of Vedanta on Campbell, as well as the Vedanta influence on Star Wars. Despite his criticism, Campbell's friendship with the Swami and involvement with the center continued after his trip from India until the Swami passed away nearly 2 decades later. Here's a picture from 1963 showing, 1963 showing Campbell attending the centenary celebration of Swami Vivekananda's birth hosted by the New York Center. Also attending was United Nations General Secretary U Thant and Chester Carlson, the inventor and founder of Xerox, who was then president of the New York Vedanta Center. Carlson and his wife Doris supported Vedanta and other Eastern religious groups with donations and personal involvement. Doris donated a substantial sum in the mid-70s to build the new convent, now the monastery, here on our Hollywood campus. This is from Swami Nikhilananda's memorial service in 1973, which Campbell not only attended, but was a prominent participant, along with many senior Swamis of the order. Note that Campbell was the only non-monastic seated in the front. In 1988, Campbell and his work were introduced to a much wider audience through a 6-part interview with Bill Moyers titled The Power of Myth, which was televised on PBS. The series was not broadcast until 6 months after Campbell's death in 1987. He didn't live to see just how wildly popular and influential he had become. The series was a big hit and brought a lot of attention to Campbell's work.
God is a thought. God is an idea. But its reference is to something that transcends all thinking. Every God, every mythology, every religion is true in this sense. It is true as metaphorical of the human and cosmic mystery. There is an old story that is still good. The story of the quest, the spiritual quest. That's to say, to find the inward thing which you basically are. All of these symbols in mythology refer to you. You are God in your deepest identity. You are one with the transcendent.
Now for some background on George Lucas, the creator and director of Star Wars. He graduated from the film school at USC, where he won first place in the National Student Film Festival. His first theatrical movie was a commercial adaptation of the sci-fi thriller THX 1138. It's a serious film that portrays a stark future where the population is controlled by computers, drugs, and manipulation by a state televised religion. To get away from the Hollywood studio system, Lucas decided to start his own company, Lucasfilm, and set out to make American Graffiti based on his own teenage years in the early 60s. The film was a substantial critical and financial success. But even with that early success, Lucas had trouble getting Star Wars made. Universal Pictures, which had financed and distributed American Graffiti, dropped its option for Star Wars because they thought the concept was too weird. Finally, 20th Century Fox agreed to support the film, and Star Wars was released in 1977. It was an immediate hit, exceeding everyone's expectations, and pulling Fox from the brink of bankruptcy. Millions of people flocked to see the movie. It was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, taking home 7 Oscars. Now let's look inside the film. What were the major influences that helped shape the plot and visuals? While in college, Lucas was introduced to the films of Japanese director Akira Kurosawa, whose classic Seven Samurai would come to be ranked as one of the greatest films of all time. Many of the Star Wars images, characters, and scenes, and even camera techniques were strongly influenced, some would say lifted, from Kurosawa's 1958 film, The Hidden Fortress. There's a battle scene early in the film where 2 hapless characters are caught in the crossfire. There's a feisty princess who is trapped behind enemy lines and makes unreasonable demands on the people around her who are trying to help. Two comical characters squabble at times, parting company and going their own way. The group is challenged at a city gate and magically are allowed to go on their way. And of course, the sword fighting scenes, lots of sword fighting scenes. The chase. And finally, the princess is returned to her rightful place, and the heroes who helped her are honored. The other major and more important influence came from author and mythologist Joseph Campbell, who Lucas fully acknowledges was a critical ingredient for the creation and success of Star Wars. Lucas had struggled to complete the script. He was stuck and recalled having read Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces in college, Going back to that book cleared the way.
About 10 years ago, I set out to write a children's film. I had an idea of doing a modern fairy tale, stumbled across A Hero with a Thousand Faces. After reading more of Joe's books, I began to understand how I could do this. It was a great gift, and a very important moment. If I don't, it's possible that if I had run across that, I would still be writing Star Wars today. I think my last mentor probably was Joe Campbell, who asked a lot of the interesting questions and exposed me to a lot of things that made me very interested in a lot more of the cosmic questions and the mystery. And I've been interested in those all my life, but I hadn't focused it the way I had once I got to be good friends with Joe.
I found dozens of books and articles about the philosophy of Star Wars from the point of view of several religious and philosophical paths, including Vedanta, Buddhism, Christianity, Taoism, and Stoicism. I even found an essay about how Star Wars promotes the Antichrist.
What do you make of the fact that so many people have interpreted Star Wars as being profoundly religious?
I don't see Star Wars as profoundly religious. I see Star Wars as taking all of the issues that religion represents and trying to distill them down into a more modern and more easily accessible construct that people can grab onto to accept the fact that there is a greater mystery out there.
Many people today make an effort to avoid using the term religious, instead preferring the word spiritual. But I think that's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Professor Houston Smith describes the purpose of religion this way. You're in a museum standing in front of a huge tapestry hanging from the ceiling, but it makes no sense. There are colors and threads going every which way. But there's a hint of a pattern, but you can't quite get it. The purpose of religion is to take you by the hand and lead you around to the other side, and suddenly you see the pattern clearly. Religion leads us to a proper perspective that helps us to make sense of our lives and the world. Now let's look at the film in detail. I hope everyone here has seen at least one of the Star Wars films, but just in case, I'll give a brief outline of the plot, characters, and the galaxy where the stories take place. There is a democracy uniting most of the worlds of the galaxy. It's called the Galactic Republic, with a central senate. The Jedi Knights are followers of an ancient religion still practiced and taught by only a few, mainly celibate monks, who are the protectors and defenders of the Force, a mystical presence in the galaxy. Later we'll get into what the Force is supposed to represent. There is an evil emperor who overthrows the Democratic Republic, creating a galactic empire with the help of Darth Vader, who utilizes powers from the dark side of the Force. Three of the main characters are Yoda, an 800-year-old guru-like Jedi master. By the way, Lucas has been quoted as saying Campbell is his Yoda, and Luke Skywalker, the young hero in training to become a Jedi Knight, and Darth Vader, the villain who is known as Anakin before turning to the dark side of the Force.
The film is ultimately about the dark side and the light side, and those sides are designed around compassion and greed. And we all have those two sides of us, and that we have to make sure that those two sides of us are in balance.
For me, the most compelling and interesting idea in the films is the concept of the Force. It should be recognized that Lucas himself decided to leave the exact nature of the Force nebulous, leaving room for the viewer to supply his own concept. But what exactly is the Force supposed to represent, which needs to be brought back into balance? Perhaps something like this. In the Spiritual Heritage of India, Swami Prabhupada wrote about the Vedantic view of cosmic forces, which fits neatly into the Force concept of Star Wars. Prakriti is defined as the state of equilibrium of the three gunas. The beginning of evolution is the loss of that equilibrium. Swami goes on to say, it's a characteristic of the mind that it tends both towards good and towards evil. Vasa, the ancient commentator, compared it to a river that flows in opposite directions at the same time. The mind's tendency is towards good. The will to freedom is inherent in every man and is greater than the opposed forces. The will to liberation exists, according to yoga, side by side with the will to desire. And strange as though it may seem, impulse and desire can be completely overcome, though the will to freedom cannot. The force can also be compared to Ishvara, that aspect of God who interacts and plays in creation. From Swami Prabhupada translation of the Bhagavad Gita, Brahman brings being the absolute is beyond all action. Therefore, Brahman cannot be said to create or destroy. It is Ishvara, Brahman united with his power, who creates this universe, preserves it, and dissolves it. Here's a clip that gives us a small but explicit clue to Star Wars philosophy.
For my ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is. Life creates it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter.
Aldous Huxley described it this way in his introduction to the Swami P. Bhagavad Gita. Man possesses a double nature, a phenomenal ego and an eternal self, which is the inner man, the spirit, the spark of divinity within the soul. Now here's where Campbell's influence really went viral. After seeing the first Star Wars film, Hollywood scriptwriter Christopher Vogler recognized that the film's plot had followed Campbell's hero's cycle. In 1985, he wrote a memo titled A Practical Guide to the Hero with 1,000 Faces. The memo and later books spread like wildfire in the film industry and became the working paradigm for story development. Years later, when Vogler worked for Disney, his memo came to the attention of the head of the studio, who was very impressed with the idea of incorporating timeless mythological themes in their plot development. Vogler was assigned to the Lion King production staff, but it turned out they were already working with the memo, as it is floated around the industry. It starts with this powerful statement. Now, I'm going to read a bit from this memo as it describes the theme I'm trying to convey better than I can. Oh, thank you. You're going to have to look up on the screen too. There we go. Thank you for the assist. So I'm going to read a bit from this memo as it describes the theme I'm trying to convey better than I can. In the long run, one of the most influential books of the 20th century may turn out to be Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces. The book and the ideas of it are having a major impact on writing and storytelling, but above all on movie making. Filmmakers like John Borman, George Miller, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Francis Coppola owe their success in part to the ageless patterns that Joseph Campbell identifies in his book. Vogler continues, the repeating characters of the hero myth, such as the young hero, the wise old man or woman, the shape-shifting woman or man, and the shadowy antagonist are identical with the archetypes of the human mind, as revealed in dreams. That's why myths and stories are constructed on the mythological model strike us as psychologically true. Such stories are true models of the workings of the human mind, true maps of the psyche. They are psychologically valid and realistic even when they portray fantastic, impossible, unreal events. This accounts for the universal power of such stories. Stories built on the model of the hero myth have an appeal that can be felt by everyone because they spring from a universal source in the collective unconsciousness and because they reflect the universal concerns. They deal with the childlike questions of, who am I? Where did I come from? Where will I go after I die? What is good and what is evil? What must I do about it? What will tomorrow be like? Where did yesterday go? Is there anybody else out there? There is a parallel in all this to what linguist Noam Chomsky defined as universal grammar of language, grammar being the rules that language or other systems follow. Chomsky's thesis is that there are underlying rules and elements common to all languages, which are hardwired in our brains from birth, so much so that Chomsky speculates that aliens from other world would conclude that all the language of Earth are just dialects derived from the same source, following a universal grammar of language. Oh. Sorry about that. Following a universal grammar of language. Now it's this chart. Similarly, Houston Smith demonstrated a universal grammar of religion through his life's work. Here he charted the levels of religious reality and their corresponding names in each of the major religions of the world. Levels of reality that are both within you, the bottom half of the chart, and reality that is transcendental to our physical experience, the top half of the chart. Aldous Huxley, a friend and mentor of Houston Smith, documented the universal grammar of religion, although he didn't use that phrase, in The Perennial Philosophy, his compilation of the teachings of the world's religions. Huxley worked on that book while staying at Tribuco, where before it was donated to become the Vedanta Society's Ramakrishna monastery. Similarly, Campbell's life's work defined the universal grammar of mythology, which Lucas incorporated into Star Wars. Here's Campbell's simplified map of the hero's journey. This is the mythological pattern that Star Wars followed, starting at the top and glowing clockwise. The hero is introduced in his ordinary world. There isn't a call to adventure, which can come from an internal inspiration or imposed on you by external circumstances. Being helped by supernatural aid, the crossing of a threshold, the help of a mentor. The hero faces challenges and temptations. There is a revelation, an atonement, and finally the return of a person transformed through experience.
Well, when I did Star Wars, I consciously set about to recreate myths and the classic mythological motifs, and I wanted to use those motifs to deal with issues that existed today. I'm telling an old myth in a new way. That's how you pass down the meat and potatoes of your society to the next generation. What these films deal with is the fact that we all have good and evil inside of us, and that we can choose which way we want the balance to go.
Here's an example of Campbell's full cycle of the hero's journey as shown in Anakin's story of becoming Darth Vader, with a God's eye view of what was really happening. The very young Anakin Skywalker is recognized as the chosen one who will battle the dark side and bring balance to the Force. Anakin goes on his own hero's journey and is trained to be a Jedi. But through attachments, anger, and personal ambitions, Anakin is turned to the dark side of the Force and becomes the arch-villain Darth Vader. How are we to understand this? Was the prophecy wrong? At one point, Darth Vader fights with Luke, his own son, and tries to tempt him to the dark side. But in the end, as the evil emperor is about to kill Luke, Darth Vader steps in and takes on the fight and kills the emperor, resulting in a reconciliation between father and son. On one level, Anakin's hero journey seems like a tale of high promise and expectation, then a fall from grace, and finally redemption by saving Luke and killing the emperor. But if we zoom out to a higher, more holistic way to look at it, from God's point of view, we see that without his knowledge, Anakin was trained and groomed to be the instrument of the Force, to kill the emperor, proving Darth Vader's fight with the Emperor was not just redemption for Anakin, but a fulfillment of his higher destiny, returning balance to the Force as was prophesied in his youth. Anakin, as Darth Vader, was in the right place at the right time, with enough strength and capability gained from all the good and bad experiences he went through to be able to conquer the Emperor and return balance to the Force for the galaxy and within himself. Or more succinctly, God works in mysterious ways. Campbell was fond of recalling how Schopenhauer, in his essay on the apparent intention and the fate of the individual, wrote of the curious feeling one can have of there being an author somewhere writing the novel of our lives.
So, and look back over your life, it seems to have had an order. It seems to have had been composed by someone. And those events that when they occurred seemed merely accidental and occasional and just something that happened, turn out to be the main elements in a consistent plot. So he says, who composed this plot? And he said, and just as your dreams are composed by an aspect of yourself, of which your consciousness is unaware, so your whole life has been composed by the will within you. And then he says, just as those people whom you met by chance became effective agents in the structuring of your life, so you have been an agent in the structuring of other lives. And the whole thing gears together like one big symphony, he says, everything influencing and structuring everything else. And he said, it's as though our lives were the dream of a single dreamer in which all the dream characters are dreaming too, and so everything links to everything else, moved out of the will in nature. It's a beautiful idea. It's an idea that occurs in India in the image of what's called the net of Indra, or the net of gems. It's a net of gems where every gem reflects all the other ones. It's a marvelous idea. It's as though there were an intention behind it, and yet it all is by chance.
The implication for the Force in Star Wars is that there's a hidden intention, and although we can't see the detail, things are beautiful and triumphant in the end. As Swami P. said, virtue and truth, though sorely tried, triumph at last over vice and wickedness. Thank you.